from a rational economics perspective, customers are likely to adopt new products when the objective net benefit is greater than zero. So net benefit meaning, when the difference between the benefits and the cost, when that is greater than zero, that should provide an incentive and a motivation for customers to adopt the new product. That's from an objective, rational economics perspective. However, research has shown that that's not necessarily how customers think when they adopt new products. And like I said, they engage in an irrational manner, more from a psychological perspective, from a psychological net benefit perspective, when they decide when to adopt new products. So if we look at this slide, it shows you three different scenarios of new products. So in each of these three scenarios, you will see that the net benefit, the objective net benefit, is held constant. It's all positive. So if you look at scenario one, the costs go down. The new product's costs go down, but they don't provide any more new benefits, additional benefits compared to the existing product. In scenario two, there's no change in costs, but the new product does provide more benefits than the existing product. In scenario three, the new product provides more benefits than the existing product, but at the same time, it entails more cost than the existing product. So out of these three scenarios, which one would closely reflect reality of new products? Would it be scenario 1, 2, or 3? Most likely it would be scenario 3, because typically a new product, at least in theory, they're supposed to provide more benefits than the existing product, but because it's a new product, it could incur, additional costs. Now, the problem is, like I said, despite, the fact that the net benefit is held constant across these three scenarios, customers will react differently to these three. And in particular, because scenario 3 is the one that is closest to reality, if we focus on scenario 3, despite the cost being greater, as you can see there, the arrow is greater for the benefits than the cost, and where the net benefit may be positive, customers may not necessarily, perceive it that way from a psychological perspective, because a lot of the time customers are irrational. In other words, as I will show you in the next slide, the cost or the losses, customers tend to overweigh losses more than benefits or gains. So even though in this slide costs is smaller than the benefits in absolute size, the perception may be that cost or losses may loom larger. They may overvalue the costs, the negatives, and undervalue the benefits, which in turn may result in zero net benefits or even negative net benefits. In order to understand this at a slightly deeper level, I'm going to draw on prospect theory. And we're not going to go into the detailed dimensions of prospect theory, but we're just going to try to understand the basics of prospect theory so that we can apply this in terms of how customers adopt new products. So what we have here is a graph that shows how customers respond to gains and losses. So in the middle there is where we have the status quo, or that's the reference point. And then everything to the right of that status quo is in the domain of gains. And then everything to the left of that reference point is in the domain of losses. So here we have plus 600. So $600 will provide a $600 worth of enjoyment, happiness, satisfaction, so to speak. Whereas a negative or a loss of $200 will provide me with a dissatisfaction, a disutility of negative 200. But as you can see there, that $600, the amount, that length of that $600 is very similar to that length of that amount of negative 200. But that's kind of surprising because as you can see, The 600, the positive 600 is 3 times that of 200, negative 200. Or the negative 200 is only 1/3 of the positive 600. So if that's the case, then V600 being 3 times the amount of negative 200 should produce 3 times the level of satisfaction as the negative 200 produces level of dissatisfaction. But we see that that's not necessarily the case. Or the negative V or the V negative 200 should produce a level of dissatisfaction that is only 1/3 the level of satisfaction that the positive 600 produces. But again, we see that that is not the case. They're almost equivalent. So what is this saying? This is saying that the prospect theory, one of the core, the points of prospect theory is loss aversion, or that losses loom larger than gains. In other words, people dislike losing more than they like winning. People dislike losing more than they like winning, or loss aversion. That is one of the core underpinnings of prospect theory. So if we sort of apply this prospect theory to new product adoption, this equation, Bn minus Bo minus parentheses Cn minus Co, kind of summarizes the key point that I'm trying to communicate here, where Bn and Bo represent the benefits of new and old products respectively, and Cn and Co represent the cost of new and old products respectively. So let's first look at the first parentheses, Bn minus Bo. So if we take the example of online shopping, for example, online shopping is a new service, it's a new product that's gaining a lot of traction, but still very slow in terms of adoption, versus the traditional shopping of going to the grocery supermarket and doing the shopping the old-fashioned way. So some of the benefits of this online shopping is that it saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of hassle, you don't have to get in line. And so these are the benefits associated with this new online shopping. So that's a gain. That could be considered a gain from a customer's perspective. And then some of the benefits of the old way of shopping, which is the traditional way of shopping, physically visiting the brick and mortar store, is that you can, for produce or meat, you can see and smell, fruit and vegetables, whereas you can't do that for online shopping. If you're shopping for a steak or a meat, you can actually see the marble and see, the meat for yourself with your own eyes to decide if that's the meat for you or not, which that is not feasible in online shopping. So these are some of the benefits that you have to forego, that you lose if you change from old-fashioned shopping, the traditional way of shopping, to online shopping. So that's going to be a loss. So the Bn is considered a gain, the Bo is considered a loss. So going back to prospect theory, where losses loom larger than gains, or people overweigh losses and underweigh gains, that means that the Bn, which is a gain, will be undervalued, and the Bo, which is a loss, because they're forgiving the gain that they had with the old way of shopping, that's a loss, so they're going to overweigh the loss. So that means that Bn minus Bo will be diminished, because the Bn will be undervalued and the Bo will be overvalued. And the same logic applies to Cn minus Co. Cn, which is the cost associated with the online shopping. Some of the costs could be the fact that you have to sit in front of a computer, or when the products get delivered to your home, you may have to be home to receive those products, especially if they're they're meat or fish or something that requires refrigeration. You just can't leave it outside. So these are the costs. So Cn would be considered a loss. Whereas Co, so these are some of the costs associated with the old way of shopping. So, the time or the hassle or the inconvenience. These, you can avoid these now if you adopt online shopping. So that would be considered a gain, because you can prevent those, or you can avoid those costs associated with the old way of shopping if you adopt the online shopping way. So the Cn again would be perceived as a loss, whereas Co would be perceived as a gain. Therefore, CN being perceived as a loss will be overweighted, whereas CO being perceived as a gain will be underweighted. Therefore, that CN minus CO will be, that difference will be greater. So then, when that's subtracted from the first parentheses, BN minus BO, the whole equation now is going to become smaller, which works against the new product being adopted. So basically, what is this saying? The bottom line is that for a new product to be adopted, the benefits of the new product have to be substantially greater than the benefits of the old product, and the cost of the new product have to be substantially less than the cost associated with the old product. If these conditions are not met, then from an objective perspective, product developers or the company may consider that this product has a good chance of being adopted. But from a customer's perspective, because a lot of customers follow a very irrational perspective of adopting new products, being consistent with this prospect theory, they may not adopt the product as companies may think. So again, going back to this psychological aspect, the new product's benefits has to substantially be greater than the old product's benefits, and the cost associated with using the new product, they have to be substantially lower than the old way of, than the cost associated with the old product.